The Curse of Osiris is Destiny 2's first expansion pack. And does it do enough to pull Destiny 2 out of its rut? Well, not really. This expansion is pretty overpriced for what it is. It's just not that great. Starting off, the story is pretty darn short. You'll beat it at about 2 to 3 hours depending how fast you go. And there's not a whole lot of a real story here. You see Osiris, who's the main character and been hinted a lot in Destiny lore, for barely a couple fractions of a second on the screen, as he explains his motives and what he's doing at the beginning of the game, and then he just kind of fails to show up for the majority of the game, which makes Osiris' character completely pointless. Why bother having him if you're really going to barely ever see him? Now, Curse of Osiris takes place entirely on Mercury. You do take a slight detour during the story to another planet, but you're mostly on Mercury. It deals mostly with the Vex and their idea of the infinite force, which is this thing they've constructed that calculates simulations and looks at outcomes and does things even like time travel and stuff like that. There's all sorts of interesting ideas and things that could happen with this. Why not visit interesting places in Destiny's lore or history or time period, or look into the future? That is cool stuff. But they don't do any of that really in this expansion at all. For the most part, it takes place on these giant floating platforms that are the infinite forest in these empty, devoid areas, which is just entirely pointless and bland. It really comes across as lazy and a cheap way to create content. Now, there is a couple other things to Curse of Osiris. There is that whole new Mercury area, which does have a couple different things. However, it's one of the smallest planets in the game. There's not a whole lot you can actually do there. There's a couple adventures and side missions, but that's really it. There's just nothing in this zone at all. It's tiny compared to every other planet in the game. They also decided to increase the level cap to 25, which is kind of pointless in a way because they didn't really rebalance the game at all for it, and so it doesn't really add much of value. There's also some new strikes, but they basically just reuse the stuff from the same game, so you'll be fighting the same bosses and everything that you did in the story, so it's like, why bother even having them then? It's just repeating the same story content you already did. Now, the raid zone in Curse of Osiris is probably the most interesting one yet. It's, I think, a little bit better than the original one. I really liked it a lot. There's a lot of interesting puzzles and all to it that make it more interesting. They also add some new maps to PvP, so it kind of spices things up a little bit if you want to play PvP. Now, overall, Curse of Osiris gets a 4 out of 10. And I can say that if you like Destiny 2 a lot, then sure, go pick this game up because you're probably going to like it. There's new content and things to do. But personally, I just didn't feel like there was enough to this that really justified the $20 cost. They had a boring story with uninteresting characters and dialogue. It's incredibly short. The new planet is really small. There's just not enough content here. It's very bare minimum. And as a result, I cannot recommend Curse of Osiris to anyone.